are listening to Living with ADHD and CPTSD, available on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Living with ADHD and CPTSD. Today's episode, we're going to talk about some progress that I have made recently. And the reason that I'm being significant with this is because of the fact that in the past week or two, I have made a lot of progress in my healing and recovery from my trauma. Now, keep in mind, I know I have talked about this kind of thing in the past, and the truth is yes, there's always a possibility that I could have a relapse, and you never know exactly what's going to come in the future, but that doesn't mean that I'm not able to or not allowed to take in the accomplishments that I have made in the past weeks or months or even years, and use that as motivation to increase my abilities to be better and to respond in the correct way instead of, just allowing my triggers and trauma responses to take over and to just, never be the same. So here we are. All right. So I have made a lot of progress, as I said. When I say we, I mean me and my partner. There's been a lot of moments where there have still been situations that we have had arguments or I've made mistakes. A lot of it due to, ADHD related stuff, the odd autistic response. And in the past, I have basically made the wrong choices. Whether it was the adult, myself, or my child parts, we have always had this situation where I get triggered and then my child parts make responses that, are childlike. So they're irresponsible, they're inconsiderate, rude, hurtful. And the adult is struggling to maintain and to regain control of the situation, basically meaning there's just no hope and I'm screwed. If you want to put it bluntly, that I really have no ability to get anywhere in the conversation. And then, of course, I have a hard time or no ability to, notice that there's a problem and to step away and to stop the conversation. So now there has been a lot of improvement, and the improvement is in the way of maintaining adult behavior and being the adult and not allowing my child parts to take control, not allowing myself to become blended with my parts, and trying, and a lot of the times maintaining the ability to not get triggered. It's been a lot of fun. And when I say fun, I mean it's been interesting and it's been educational to have the understanding and the ability to notice in the moment right then and there that I'm having an issue, and to be able to not allow myself to get out of control, because in the past that has always been the problem. I've always been out of control, and I haven't been able to stay as the adult and keep things in a good manner, right? Like, she would get upset and we would be, having a conversation, and I would have a hard time being the adult, and I would slip out and become triggered. And then my child parts would take over because, of course, they are under the belief that they need to step in and take care of me because the adult obviously has no power and no ability to do the right thing. So that's what they do. They step in and they say things or they do things. And the problem is being child parts, one, they don't have the mental capacity or the ability to have a conversation in an adult manner. And two, they don't really know right from wrong because, as we're all aware, children are children. Children don't know what's the best thing to do. They don't know that they have to listen. They don't always realize that the behaviors and the words that they say are immature, potentially harmful, hurtful, rude, just straight out childish behavior. And it is something that, is pretty obvious. Children behave that way, especially when they're getting upset. So what needs to happen is, as the adult, you need to, one, understand the parts, and two, gain their trust so that in future situations that come up, much like the ones that I've had in my past, I need to be able to keep them, not out of control. Like, basically stay as the adult. Maintain adult form, maintain the level of intelligence and maturity and the communication abilities as an adult in order to stay in an adult-like situation and maintain that, have that ability to have that correct state of mind. Because if I'm able to maintain the adult, and time again, as it has proven to myself and to my child parts, even if there is a conflict or something wrong occurs, I am capable of de-escalating the situation, making the right choices, saying the right things, like apologizing and understanding and indicating to my partner the situation that is at hand and what has happened. And then, when she's been satisfied and she's happy with the response that has been given, then I am able to give an explanation as to what happened. So this is important. And if I can, continue to learn from this and grow, then I have a much better chance of educating myself, my system, and further my healing process, so that down the road someday, if I do get triggered, then I'm able to do all the right steps that are required, like stepping away from the conversation, noticing the triggers, talking to my parts, grounding myself, maintaining proper state of being, doing all the right steps that are required as a person who suffered from trauma and abuse in the past as a child and as a young teenager, to recover and to make the correct choices and to maintain, an adult state. Because that, when you think about it, for all of you out there who have CPTSD and have dealt with trauma and suffer from severe anxiety and stress, and you often get overwhelmed by your triggers and your child parts become active, that is the ultimate goal, is to, the next time we do become triggered and we feel our parts coming online, is to have the ability and the trust to step in and alleviate all the stress and all the suffering and the trauma and the re-triggering in that moment, so that we can maintain the adult, especially if we are in an activity or doing something that requires the adult to be in charge, whether it's for safety concerns, like if we're driving or we're, in an action that needs adult-like behavior and understanding in order to keep ourselves safe and the people that are with us safe. That is important. And especially in relationships, the thing that often happens because of all of our trauma that we've experienced is we truly have a hard time dealing with relationships, especially in situations where it can be a little tricky, or like in situations that are negative. Like you're never going to be in a relationship where it's always going to be happy and stress-free and conflict-free. You might have a partner there where you don't have a conflict and stress is minimal, and if you do have stress, it's really simple and it goes away fast and your conflicts end quickly. And that's fairly fortunate for people, because often there are a lot of people out there who have had their own trauma and own abuse that they've experienced, but have really done no work to heal or to even recognize that they have dealt with any kind of trauma in their past. And they end up, unfortunately, living through it for most of their life, or the beginning adult stages in independence and at the beginning of a relationship or even marriages, and they lash out, and their triggers that they have come out in their relationships, and they either become abusive themselves or they're just incapable of having a true relationship, because every time situations come up that are potentially triggering or in a negative aspect, they are not capable of handling the anxiety and the negativity that comes up. And so often their child parts will become triggered, and they take over and do things or say things that are definitely potentially harmful, both to their relationship and to them in so many ways. And this is a common thing all over the world. It's really sad, and it's extremely stressful, and it's ridiculous, because there are so many people out there who have lived through repeated trauma and have signs of CPTSD and have no idea that that's what they're dealing with. And of course they never take care of it, whether it's they are always suppressing the feelings and the pain, or they've been taught through generations to not express and talk about it. And that's just the way they deal with it. And so their partner is abusive, or they are abusive in turn, and they go through repeated relationships of failure. And maybe someday they meet somebody who's knowledgeable enough in the situation where they go, hey, look, I think you're going through some sort of trauma or trigger effect because of possibly something that happened in your past. Maybe you need to see a psychologist. Maybe you need to get some help. And then it begins, and then they go through the steps of getting the help that they require, right? If more and more people were able to get the notification and the understanding of what they've been going through, and then they can get the help that they so deserve, eventually we'll have more people who are getting healed, and there's less abuse, and then their siblings or their children or their partners don't suffer from abuse, and they don't grow up having triggers and reliving their trauma, right? Like, we might have at some point more healthier people, like children and adults that don't experience trauma, and they don't pass it on to their own children or on to their partners and live their life in fear or constantly getting triggered and constantly in pain and never heal from this. It is something that a lot of us go through, and unfortunately so few of us get the help that is needed. Now, I understand that for a lot of generations and for many decades, even recently, that there hasn't exactly been a lot of awareness when it comes to CPTSD and childhood abuse. So, of course, for many of those people in the past, they have no clue. And, they've never really understood that they dealt with this, or that what they experienced in their childhood was abuse, and that it was wrong, and that it's not their fault. And they never take the steps or are able to get the help required in order to heal from their childhood trauma. And it affects them for pretty much their entire life. And some of it is so bad and so horrific that they either develop like dissociative identity disorder, where they have multiple identities, or they just are too scared of society or relationships or family or anybody, that they become reclusive, or unfortunately they can't handle any of it, and they get to a point where they have to commit suicide and end their life because it's just too much. And they hurt people that they love, and so often their partners have never even been aware that they suffered from any kind of abuse in their life. And that is extremely sad and disheartening, because they don't speak up. They're afraid of talking about it with them because they believe that they won't understand, or they honestly won't take it seriously and won't be empathetic to their issue or their need, and they won't know what to do. So they're afraid that they're going to not be supportive, and they're just going to leave. They're not going to be able to handle the fact that their partner has dealt with and suffered from childhood abuse and is going through triggers and being re-traumatized from situations. You've seen in a lot of TV shows and in a lot of movies, there have been shows with characters who have dealt with some form of abuse, and they do a decent job of showing through the character what happens when they get traumatized and they get triggered, and it's like they suddenly feel like and believe that they're in the past, that they're at that state where they experience that trauma or that abuse, and they don't even realize necessarily that they're not in danger, that they're out of harm's way. And in that moment, they really believe that they are where they are. Like, they often believe that they are back at a 5-year-old stage, and that they're in danger, and that their mother or father or relative is once again abusing them. And so their child parts are coming out, trying to protect them, trying to keep them safe, and they're doing their damnedest to do that job that they were born for. And often a lot of people who in a relationship or on the outside looking inwards don't understand it, and a lot of times they don't really know how to deal with it. Like they don't know what to do. They don't have any experience with it, so they don't really know how to handle it. They don't know what to say. They have no means of giving any sort of decent help because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say, right? And so it ends up becoming a point in the relationship where they either are really strong and they can handle the changes, and they realize that things are going to be a little difficult for a while their partner heals and learns to become adapted to the changes, or they're not capable of handling a partner who's dealt with trauma and childhood abuse and has CPTSD, and they just walk away. And unfortunately, the majority of people in this situation, they do walk away. They aren't able to really handle it, because it can get, even for the people on the outside looking into their partner's past, it can get really stressful and overwhelming, because it often, like, there's situations where the partner, like, they want to be intimate, or they want to be physically involved or close, right? Like, two healthy people are capable of having a healthy relationship. So that's like sexually, intimately. They like to hold each other. They can talk about anything and everything and not have to fear repercussions because of it. But those people who have dealt with abuse, whether it's physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, any kind of childhood abuse that's been repetitive, that gave them the CPTSD, it is often extremely difficult for them to do these things or talk about things that in their minds could potentially re-trigger their trauma experiences and scare them. And the partner who is, the girlfriend or the boyfriend with that person who's dealt with the trauma has a hard time truly understanding and being able to accept it and be okay with the fact that their partner is on occasion going to have situations where they're scared or they get triggered. So there may be things like trying to be intimate, or talking about things that could potentially be dangerous or scary or re-triggering. Even like maybe that partner likes to watch scary movies or likes to watch action movies that has a lot of violence. Like it is a thing. I know some of you may not realize that, but that is a thing where the partner is into these things and likes to watch these movies and has a desire to, maybe want to watch these movies with their partner. And unfortunately, they can't, because there's a potential that the stuff that they see on the screen could re-trigger their trauma, and that's a scary thing. And they want to avoid that possibility. Even if they've done a lot of work and they've done a lot of healing, there's still that potential for them to be triggered by, things that are potentially violent, even if it has nothing to do with them. Like, that's the thing that a lot of people out there who don't know what trauma is and it has never experienced it and doesn't have any idea about CPTSD and has a healthy childhood and healthy adult life, is there are things that can be completely unrelated to their partner's experiences that could trigger them. Like there could be things like, this is interesting. You could have a trigger like a car revving up behind you and maybe a horn being honked, or the door in the house opening. Or maybe there's a sound that occurs that reminds them of their childhood and triggers them into re-experiencing their trauma. And to us, or to someone who doesn't understand it, won't be able to understand why it relates, right? And maybe their partner isn't really open to talking about it due to the possibility that it could trigger them. But it's definitely there. Like, imagine getting triggered because a car pulls up beside you and honks their horn. It could remind them of their abuser and triggers them into feeling unsafe and feeling in danger. And that's the sort of thing that they try to avoid having happen. Or maybe the violence that's occurring in the movie, like the person in the scene of that movie is being violent or beating up someone, and the visual aspects of what they're seeing reminds them of abuse that they received from their father. So it's triggering. So they get re-traumatized, and now their child parts are active, and they're scared, and they're freaking out because they don't know what to do, right? So there's all these things that can occur, and so the partner needs to be careful. So that was the one thing I remember when my relationship first started, and she eventually told me about the stuff that had happened. Well, not necessarily in detail. She just had told me that she suffers from CPTSD, and so I did some research and I learned about it, and eventually she gave me some details. So it was for the first little while, it was very like eye-opening and shocking, because you never really thought that this sort of stuff happened to people. And of course, in that moment, I didn't think about any of my personal experiences, so I didn't really know that it was something that I had happened to me as well. Even though it was nothing like what she went through, it was still eventually learning it was traumatizing for myself. And now, through the 3+ years of my own therapy and all the research and the work I've done, and through my podcast and all the sessions and the experiences that I've had both recently in the present day and in my past, I have come to such a great understanding of CPTSD and trauma, and how it creates a lot of anxiety and stress, and it's extremely scary and dangerous for people. My understanding of my relationship and what my partner's gone through, and now what I've gone through in my past, my level of understanding when it comes to CPTSD and trauma and abuse is extremely high. And it's amazing how often when I read other people's tweets or their messages or their experiences, and I see videos on YouTube about it, it's really amazing and pleasing to me how well I understand it. And my knowledge when it comes to CPTSD is so high up there compared to the way it was back when I started all this. It's been a hell of a journey, because there's been a lot of, fallbacks, and you learn things, and then you have setbacks, and you realize that you've got to do more work, and it's a constant battle daily, always trying to figure out stuff, learning from it. But at the same time, I would rather know about it than not, and that's the key here. And I think that's for everybody who has dealing with CPTSD on their own and are getting the help that they need, and learning about trauma and their experiences and connecting with their past and healing from it, and connecting and reintegrating with their child parts. You're all at some point going to realize that you are grateful for this experience and learning about everything that's happened and understanding CPTSD. And that is another episode of Living with ADHD and CPTSD. Well, I hope you enjoyed this particular episode. If you have any comments or questions, or maybe a suggestion for my podcast, there are a number of ways to get hold of me. First, you can email me. It's livingwithadhdandcptsd@gmail.com. You can contact me on Twitter. My handle is @ADHDandCPTSD. You can also get a hold of me on Mastodon, which is a new social media website that is kind of taking over a little bit for Twitter. If you look up Living with ADHD and CPTSD at mastodon.world, then you can find me there, you can follow me, and you can give me a shout and let me know what you think. You can also go to my website. It's www.livingwithadhdandcptsd.ca. And you can also check out my YouTube page. It's at Living with ADHD and CPTSD. If you would like to donate to help my cause for my podcast, you can go to ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/living with ADHD and CPTSD. You can also go to my Patreon page, Living with ADHD and CPTSD, and become a member, where you get special access to all early episodes, plus merchandise. You can purchase merchandise to support this podcast. So, go to Patreon. All right, everybody. That's it for today. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.